sort of thing you would expect from a Democrat. Brady, you know, I'm going to have no tax cuts, no tax increases. All right, this isn't expected. Who is the candidate who's talking about the economy? Who is the pro-economy candidate? Because one problem with those two perspectives is they assume that in any economy, if you've got labor but no capital, you can function. Or if you've got capital but no labor, you can function. And you don't have to study economics very deeply to realize that to produce anything, you need both capital and labor. We need pro-economy candidates who understand that our economy is a very, very complex unit, and the interdependence between capital and labor is really critical. And we need to think about which of these we need to invest more in. We need to think about strengthening those ties, not assuming that to some extent they're substitutes. And I think this is probably the most frightening part of what has been going on right now in the last several months. This a complete lack of understanding about how the economy functions. And I find it very frightening because the Institute of Government and Public Affairs every 2 years has a new legislative conference. And the legislators are encouraged to listen to a number of perspectives. People come and talk about social problems, talk about taxation. And Bill Tester from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and I, last time, went down to talk about the economy. Of the 22 new legislators who elected that year, one was in the room when we got up to speak. They're lawyers. You know, they don't need to understand this stuff, right? And this is really frightening. So these are the guys who, without any understanding of our economy, are making decisions about legislation that affects the economic competitiveness and the economic health of our economy. And we've seen the results of that abject rejection of an opportunity to expand their horizons. And secondly, there is a lot of work out there that says the only place in which we're getting job growth in this economy is from small firms. And the evidence suggests that that may be a major contribution. But over the period 1997 to 2005, 2/3 of all job growth in this country occurred in existing firms. Illinois has a large number of existing firms. But a very informal survey we conducted a couple of years ago indicated that 10 of the largest firms in Illinois had absolutely no plans to expand employment opportunities in the state. Caterpillar, for example, recently announced the opening of a plant in Texas, not in Illinois. And I think that what this tells us is that the private sector has finally come to the conclusion that the type of leadership we have in this state over the last 2 decades is not conducive to their growing their businesses in Illinois. And it's not a Democrat or Republican problem, it's a bipartisan problem. And now when you consider that firms have enormous flexibility in where they can locate economic activity, Illinois is in a much less stronger position than it was 30 years ago, where high transportation costs made it very difficult if you wanted to serve the Midwest market, not to locate in the Midwest. Now you can locate in China, you can locate in Alaska, North Dakota. It doesn't make much difference. The transportation costs are no longer a burden. And I think that we've got a sort of mentality here where a large, sophisticated economy will muddle through. We're not going to muddle through this one. We barely muddled through the last few recessions, but this is a very different crisis. So what have we done? What's come out of Springfield? Well, we have indicted 2 former governors, and I think for a few weeks at least, Illinois was #1 in terms of corruption per capita, and then New Jersey arrested a whole bunch of people, and as their state's attorney said, you know, in Illinois, they just sent around 1 squad car. We had to hire 2 school buses. So we're not even #1 in corruption per capita. We've accumulated $13 billion in our current account debt and $80 billion in pension liabilities. And these are enormous issues. We perform triage rather than taking bold steps. And I think it's very, very clear that none of us has any confidence that either side has any wisdom in terms of coming up with some fresh ideas, fresh perspective, or even to recognize that we have a major league problem. And it's very clear that our state's fiscal condition is tied to two very important issues. One, the policies that we've enacted, and secondly, our fiscal capacity. And the latter one is very important. The last time we changed the state's taxing system was in the 1970s. In the 1970s, manufacturing contributed 36% of our state's gross product. You know what it contributes now? 12%. We don't tax services. So we're taxing, and we have a tax structure which is based on an economy which has disappeared. And it is no wonder that our fiscal capacity is so constrained. Some colleagues in the Institute of Government who are part of something we call the Fiscal Futures Project recently presented to President Hogan the following set of information in terms of looking at the magnitude of the problem and some broad solutions. And basically what they said, what happens if we borrow? That just makes the problem worse. And that's sort of a classic, let's put it off on the future generations. Let's grow. Optimistically, if we added 10% to our current take in terms of income and sales tax, that would add about $1.8 billion. But where would that growth come from? One option is business starts expanding. But as I think I hopefully suggested to you, that's not likely to come very soon or very rapidly, and certainly not at the level of 10%. If we increase the income tax rate by 1%, that will add somewhere between 2.5 and 3 billion. Increasing the sales tax to expand it to services will raise about another 3.6 billion. And then if we cut spending by 10%, the Brady proposal, that would generate about 3.4 billion. But if you add all of that up, it still is less than the $12.3 billion in the current account deficit, and doesn't address the $82 billion of unfunded pension liabilities. And I think it's very interesting that even very conservative business groups in Chicago, like the Civic Federation, the Commercial Club of Chicago, are pointing out that some mix of the bottom three is absolutely essential. But increasingly, the focus is we just don't trust the legislature, and until they address that issue, nobody is really going to get behind any proposal for future tax increases. Looking at the performance of our economy, you can see that with the green line, we underperform in terms of growth rates the national economy, which is the blue line, year by year by year. And since 1990, as I pointed out, we haven't done that. And we've also underperformed our surrounding states. And this is very surprising because if you think about this in terms of a portfolio, if you think that your target is to do as well as the Dow Jones index, you want to have an investment portfolio that looks like that. So it will basically monitor what the Dow Jones does.